Hi everybody, this is Amanda Pratt with Imagine Life Therapy. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I specialize in working with people with chronic illness. Dr. Jennifer Martin, PsyD, and also a person living with multiple chronic health conditions, she created or wrote an article about her adaptation of the stages of grief for someone experiencing chronic pain or chronic illness. She found this to be true for both the patients she had been working with who have chronic illness and chronic pain, as well as for herself. She reflected on these experiences and how the regular 5 stages of grief didn't really fit with her experience or their experience. She made these adaptations and she actually added a couple extra stages. So her stages of grief that are experienced by people with chronic pain or chronic illness has 7 stages instead of 5. Denial, she describes it as being like in a state of shock that you have this chronic illness, or even a refusal to believe that it's true, which I know I definitely experienced for a couple years. I still sometimes question it. And I think that this sense of denial is more out of a need to compartmentalize all of these changes that we're automatically expected to make and how we're going to fit this new thing into our lives. Denial and shock are something that help us cope, and there are survival mechanisms that help us cope with that. And that this can be a dangerous stage to get stuck in, because if you're in denial about your illness, you might not take the steps necessary to make yourself better or to manage it effectively, which could then make it worse. So this can be a really tricky stage for some people. Pleading and bargaining, of course, this is the stage where we kind of go, maybe if I change my diet, everything will just go away. Maybe if I just reduce my stress, everything will go away and I'll cure it and then I won't have this problem anymore. Anything that gives us or allows us to keep the same life and the same activities and these same abilities that we once had, we're going to do everything that we can to preserve that before actually making the changes in our life that we need to make. And then we tend to become fixated on that. And I think that one thing that she adds that I really identified with was she calls this stage pleading, bargaining, and desperation. And I definitely remember feeling desperation in just not wanting that to be the reality. We'll even go back and think, what could I have done differently? Did I do this to myself? There are a lot of cultural stigma out there that affirm the belief that people with chronic illness somehow do it to themselves, which obviously isn't always true. And in a lot of cases, there are things that we just would have never known. Like if you get a virus and it activates your disease that you had a genetic predisposition to develop at some point. We would never have any way of knowing that that thing was going to trigger it, or that you had a genetic predisposition for this illness in the first place. So it's hard to prevent something you didn't know you needed to prevent. Guilt comes with this stage very frequently, and that's a tough stage to go through. Anger, once you realize that nothing is going to change, this is your diagnosis, you can't plead or bargain your way out of it, you start to get angry at the situation, and this anger tends to start the healing process. I think it's a necessary stage. I think that thinking in terms of how it's not fair, we have to go through those feelings in order to get past them. Sometimes people can get stuck in this. They get stuck in the anger, just like they can grieving a loss of a person. We have to make the decision to either let that anger take over or to just not be angry and focus on something more productive. The more that you allow yourself to really feel that and work through it, the more that you're going to be able to get past it. Just like any other difficult emotion we experience, it's good to talk about it, it's good to live it, it's good to recognize that you're experiencing that and that it's okay. Anxiety and depression. Now, a lot of times these come with chronic illness in general, but they also come as a part of grief. And I think it's important to recognize that. Depression isn't necessarily a sign of a mental illness, so to speak. It can be a situational type depression. And a lot of times people will say that they have depression and they don't really relate it to the experience of having a chronic illness. And then they realize it's a normal part of adjusting to a major life stressor, and that we can have situational depression, that if you remove the situation, that depression is going to go away. That's kind of a key sign of it. Dealing with chronic pain can bring up anxiety and depression, and how you're going to be able to manage it, what your future is going to look like. The feelings of loss, just the feeling of being in pain is a really difficult feeling to experience, especially if you have to experience it every single day. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, but then also the problems that it adds to your life, like medical bills and finances and work and employment and relationships, all of these stressors are attributed and a part of this bigger stressor of having a chronic illness. And I think a lot of people think we're just supposed to know how to deal with it, and that's not true. We need help getting through this. We need all the support we can get. And it's a challenging thing, but we can manage it effectively if we break it down into manageable chunks and we problem solve and we get help where we need it. Loss of self and confusion. She describes this as kind of waking up one day and not recognizing who you are, questioning what your purpose in life is. She says that she has seen a lot of people recognizing that they're not as social as they used to be, that they might have to give up their career and create a whole new vision of what their career or work is going to look like. And so all of this changes your identity, or this identity that you thought you had, and you may have just been getting comfortable in that identity when you got this illness, and it kind of changes everything. I definitely still feel some of this every so often when I reflect on who I used to be and the things I used to do and what I do now. So this is a very normal part, especially depending on what kind of abilities, how you're limited by your illness and things like that. A reevaluation of your life, your roles, and your goals. So obviously after you go through this crisis of identity, you then are going to be forced to either get stuck in that crisis of loss of identity, or you're going to reevaluate your life and say, okay, what am I going to do about this? Who am I going to be now? Where am I going to go with this? How is this going to fit into my life? And so we kind of have to reevaluate, reintegrate this illness and these lifestyle changes into our day-to-day and make it our new normal, so to speak. Something that really helped me was finding ways to incorporate things I used to enjoy doing, but in smaller, more manageable chunks. The last stage is acceptance. Now, I have a hard time with acceptance, that word or the connotation of it, as you probably know from some of my past posts, mostly because to me, acceptance implies that someone asked and you accepted, but we aren't given a choice when diagnosed with a chronic illness. But she does address this in this stage. She describes it as often being confused with being okay with your illness, which I think that a person who doesn't have a chronic illness, who says just accept it, sometimes that is what they're communicating, like they think you should just be okay with it. But I think it's important to distinguish between acceptance and learning to integrate the illness into your life in a useful way. She talks about how it's more about recognizing that this reality is permanent, that this illness is going to be something that you have to learn to live with, and that means making changes. And if that means calling it acceptance, great. If that means calling it integration, that's fine too. Whatever you call this stage, this is the stage where you really start to take ownership of what's happening and make the changes necessary in order to move forward, because that's kind of the point of all of this, is being able to find a place for this thing in your life to make the changes you need to make so that you can move forward and focus on the things that are really important to you. It's important to remember that these stages are not linear, that you can go from one stage to the next and then back to another stage. She also says that we have to find new things that bring us joy and make adaptations and alterations to our lives. And I think this is the key to this stage and really the key to successfully managing any chronic illness. There's a questionnaire that I give my clients sometimes where I assess their level of coping, and I have done it for myself and have assessed my level of coping at different stages in my illness. If you are able to adapt to your illness and accept it, they call it acceptance too. I call it adaptation. But if you score high in acceptance or adaptation and finding positive aspects of your illness, ways that it's changed your life for the positive, ways that you've been able to find a purpose through it all, they find that you're better able to manage and cope with it, and your outcomes are better than if you stay stuck in that state of hopelessness where you feel like you have no control over what happens to you and you feel helpless in your situation. These 7 stages really help get to the heart of what that experience is like when you have grief and loss feelings as a result of being diagnosed with a chronic illness. I'm going to share this on my blog post. I'll share the link to it and this video, and comment with what you think about it. Sometimes these things don't apply to you the same way. We all have our own experiences, and I would love to hear about yours.